Joining us now, Anja Manuel. She's the co-founder and partner in a strategic consulting firm with former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, former National Security Advisor Stephen Hadley, and former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates. Also with us, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, now the Dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, retired four-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis. He is Chief International Security and Diplomacy Analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. Joe, where do you want to begin?
Well, let's start with the Admiral. Admiral, what would you do if you were advising the President of the United States today on a response, even if it's a limited response, but a response all the same to these images that we've seen coming out of Syria? What would your advice be?
You know, I'd start by saying, Joe, we can't take our eye off the main ball here, which remains the Islamic State. We don't want to lose our momentum there. Let's park that. In terms of a response to the chemical weapons, I think Richard Haass got it about right, which is big opportunity. I'd get the allies together. You've already heard support from France and the United Kingdom. And I think perhaps starting to put more effort into the Syrian opposition. I think longer term, you're going to have to look at a partition of Syria. The real analogy here is perhaps the Balkans. But I think a quick reaction would probably entail getting the allies together, notably the Turks, who have the largest army in NATO, looking at a creation of a safety zone and putting a plan together with our allies to respond to this, because we can't let this stand.
Would you consider airstrikes against Assad's Air Force, who dropped these weapons?
Yeah, that was certainly the plan, and Secretary Gates knows this well, certainly the plan in the 2013 red line situation. I think that's probably the most dramatic response you could take. You'd want to measure that one pretty carefully and think through what happens after you do that. But I think if you want a specific, immediate, proximate, that is going to be on the table for discussion at the National Security Council. And
discussions today and tomorrow with the president of China will be happening, Anja. What is the potential there? I'm going to take it to Richard as well, who has a piece in the Boston Globe about that. But first, Anja.
Yeah, I think this is absolutely a get-to-know-you summit. We shouldn't be expecting any big deliverables. I think it's a good idea for foreign leaders to come early and come often to learn how to deal with President Trump and his team. And I think both sides are going to be looking for a smooth summit. As you know, President Xi is going into his own National Party Congress this fall. He can't have a big blow-up with the United States, and the president very much needs a win.
Richard?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%, what Anja said. So what it means is probably the Chinese are going to very quickly put on the table a couple of goodies for the United States, some investment, so what they can show that American jobs are being created. And I think the most interesting thing will be the conversation about North Korea. Neither side is ready for a negotiation, but I do think they'll set in motion a channel for follow-on talks. And it's a way to let the Chinese know that we are expecting them to use the influence they say they don't have, but we all know they do have with North Korea. And I think that's what this summit is going to set up.
Michael?
And to pull the whole morning together, just to bring it, I think, into one piece. The question now, whether it's Syria or China and North Korea, is what does the saved and reestablished National Security Council under H.R. McMaster put on the table for the president now that they've de-Bannonized, the White House, the foreign policy making structure? What will these guys now actually tee up for today's meeting? So we were specifically in Syria about what steps to take, and of course on North Korea. So this is their moment to actually reset a foreign policy that looks familiar as opposed to one that looks haphazard.
Absolutely a moment. I mean, not completely de-Bannonized, Joe, but certainly the first cut has happened, and there is a fairly strong foreign policy team in place.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. They've got a very strong foreign policy team in place. They, of course, have to staff up the State Department and the Pentagon right now. But you look at the principles, and the president has a great opportunity to draw upon some of the best minds in Washington, D.C. Right now, I'm going to draw upon one of the best minds on the planet, of course, the great Richard Haass. Richard, in your Boston Globe piece, I was talking about grilling, of course, Richard. Don't get a big head. In your Boston Globe piece,
thank you, Joe.
You write in the Globe that there's no reason for us to fall into the mistaken belief that we must either be in a hot war or a cold war with China. that actually we may be able to work with them in ways that we can't work with Russia, because China, obviously, is a massive economy. That economy is integrated across the globe. And they actually, like us, have much to lose with a hot or cold war. Talk about that.
Well, absolutely. That's where the parallels with Russia, I think, break down. Russia is 1/10 the size of China. It's basically a gas and oil economy. The one thing it has is coercive force, whether it's cyber or military. China, Joe, is a real country with a real economy. Its future is totally dependent on access to the region and the world. As Anja said, what they want to do is have things stable. This is really nothing new. The whole Deng Xiaoping philosophy of China, stable exterior so we can do the political and economic development at home. This needs to continue. And it becomes a very different century. Imagine the United States and China can deal with North Korea. Imagine we can deal with climate issues. Imagine we can avoid a trade war. It is a fundamentally different 21st century than if the United States and China begin to mimic the pattern, say, of the United States and the Soviet Union. There's a school of thought that thinks this negative future is inevitable. I think it would be the great failure of diplomacy and statecraft of this century if the United States and China ended up at loggerheads. I think the future is yet to be written here. So I think there's a real opportunity. And what this summit this week does, it's a small step, but it's the small step to get these countries on the right trajectory.
And Mika, that's what your father said when he was receiving an award at Columbia this past weekend, that this relationship that became official actually in your parents' house in 1979 in McLean. There have been a lot of ups and downs over those 40 years or so, but your father was saying this past weekend, this is what defines U.S. foreign policy. He and Richard Haass agree. There's much at stake at this meeting.
All right, well, we need to continue this conversation and bring in the cover of Time magazine. Anja, please stay with us. We'll be right back. Sobering cover story for Time magazine, the uranium underworld. ISIS wants a dirty bomb, and it knows where to get one. Michael Duffy, happy Thursday. So tell us about it.
Today's theme is instability, whether in the Middle East or in Asia. And this is just another piece of it, which is there is a kind of superhighway of fissile material, radioactive goods that you can get or get into if you're in the market for a dirty bomb, which is a radioactive device that doesn't exactly kill people, but in a small package, like a suitcase or a backpack, in a big city can cause a huge amount of terror. It was a huge fear during the last two administrations because it does huge economic damage. It terrifies people. And there is, what the story is about is how between essentially Russia and the Caucasus Mountains and down into Turkey, in the former Soviet states, there is a burgeoning black market of materials, both from the former Soviet arsenal and from just the way you can pick up fissile material in all kinds of spaces now. And what threat that poses for the U.S. and the West.
And Joe, as Michael lays the groundwork for this story, we have Anja Manuel and the Admiral Stavridis standing by. Joe?
So I guess I'll open it up to whomever feels most qualified to answer this. So we've been worried about this for some time. We were worried about Al-Qaeda putting a dirty bomb in Times Square 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. So Anna, what is stopping that? What has prevented that so far, and what's our best move to prevent that from happening over the next 5, 6, 7 years?
Sure. We've done very important intelligence work on all of these groups. I think we are miles different from where we were when we were attacked on September 11th, so that's positive. But this, of course, is the nightmare scenario, and it's not 100% under control. It's far from that. You know, you look at the fight that's been happening with ISIS in Syria, and Iraq, it's quite clear that the caliphate is going to go away. We're going to win that military battle, but that doesn't mean that we've won the battle against ISIS, and stories like this just emphasize that we need to continue to be vigilant here in the United States.
Admiral Stavridis.
You know, I would say, I agree with Anja. I would say, as I mentioned earlier, we need to keep the pressure on to make sure we do kind of complete the kinetic effort in Raqqa, because that will undermine the command and control of these things. But I'd say three things we need to be doing. One is international cooperation on this intelligence piece. The second is much better interagency cooperation. How are we bringing the different pieces and parts of the U.S. government together to cooperate? And lastly, and most importantly, Joe and Mika, is private-public cooperation here. A lot of this flows from commercial actors. There's a trail of this, as mentioned in the story. It also runs through Moldova. There's a private-public piece. So international, interagency, private-public, using the intel, as Anja says. We can work this, but it is a challenge, and time is right to highlight it.
Admiral James Stavridis and Anja Manuel, thank you very much.